Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining me this week on Skwawk Talk on Socialist Telly. This week I'm talking to three of my colleagues on Socialist Telly about what's been going on. Most of us were in a roundup program only yesterday, and within that 24-hour period, we've seen so much happen that the Skwawk Talk program tonight is going to be all about that as well. And we've seen Keir Starmer as well. No, it's not astonishing, but it should be. Saying he's refusing to call for the resignation of Matt Hancock after the High Court found Matt Hancock guilty of unlawful conduct in the awarding of contracts worth millions and millions of pounds out to his cronies and mates. We've seen Rishi Sunak announce that he wants to increase corporation tax, or leak that out to the press, and the Labour leader being to the right of him on that and not wanting to increase corporation tax. And we've seen Keir Starmer's front bench be involved in a company which is under investigation now by the Electoral Commission for not properly declaring huge amounts of money in donations that it received as far back as the middle of 2018. Few of the niche things we'll talk about as well, but welcome, folks. Thank you for coming on. Hot topic right at the minute is the Keir Starmer performance and that refusal when invited to on Sky News this morning to call for the resignation of Matt Hancock over this High Court judgment. What do you make of that, guys?
I think this could be, for want of a better word, a moment. We've had quite a spectacle today, a sickening spectacle, quite frankly, today, of a man of the law, which is what Keir Starmer has been for most of his life, not standing up for the law. And I would imagine people up and down the country who work in the legal profession and who have followed this Matt Hancock story might well have been utterly aghast at Starmer's response on Sophie Ridge's show this morning. The High Court found that Matt Hancock had acted unlawfully where it came to health contracts. He had not followed the law, which indicated he had to publicise within 30 days the nature of how those contracts were issued and who to, and yet Keir Starmer doesn't even demand a resignation from him, let alone recommend any further legal action against Hancock himself or his department. And it left me wondering what happened to this man who said, when I see an injustice, I want to put it right. And it's for this reason I think that this is a moment, because if Starmer, this man of law, no longer stands for the law, and taken together with all the abstention and inaction we've seen from him as Labour leader, I think there can be no longer any doubt that this is a Labour leader in name only. A leader who cannot or will not lead either because he's too afraid to, or because actually he has no alternative to offer whatsoever. It is beyond any doubt now, in my opinion, that Keir Starmer will not change. And I truly think that the longer he remains in his post from this moment onwards, the harder it's going to be to repair the damage as to how our party is now seen by a good many people. Because to trend once after a bit of a gap is one thing. We see this all the time on Twitter. But to trend twice at the same time, as we've seen today, I don't think I've ever seen that. And I think the parliamentary party need to take a long, hard look at themselves right now. I know many of them have popped out and said, you know, he's wrong and resignations are needed. But collectively, they need to take a long, hard look at themselves right now and decide just how much longer they're willing to let this nonsense continue.
What do you make of it?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Damo had to say there. I mean, many of us who've been campaigning for the protection of the NHS have been flagging up concerns about outsourcing and contracts being awarded left, right and centre. We spoke recently, the latest Tory so-called reforms of the NHS will actually bake this into legislation, that this will be the norm, not the exception. You know, hat check to the Good Law Project who got this out. And I would say, coming from the former director of public prosecutions, who, let's not forget it, jailed kids for stealing bottles of water during the riots not so many years ago, to fail to call for the resignation of Matt Hancock, who's in charge of health, for breaking the law, is enormously remiss. And rather than calling for the resignation of Matt Hancock, maybe someone else's resignation is now due.
Nico.
Yeah, I want to build on what the others have just said, and the what's in the law at the moment. If I can share the screen, I'll just show you some of the ways it's been presented. If I can just blow it up. NHS reforms will cut red tape, will remove their bureaucracy busting. They will cut bureaucracy. What we're talking about is, we've seen it. It's getting rid of competition regulation so that you can outsource to mates. And this has been building up for years towards this, and Labour has been quite supportive of it, actually, despite conference demanding that they oppose accountable care organisations, however they're renamed, which is what the legislation is about. And all the hospital closures we've been talking about are about, because they're not, they're cutting out the profitable bit, the unprofitable bits. This is what happens in the US. So here's just an article mentioning accountable care organizations have exemptions from antitrust law, which is competition regulation in the US. And that's the example that's been looked at in the UK as well. You go to Nuffield Trust website and watch their videos. They talk about this stuff with people from the US. At the time of the Health and Social Care Act, they were talking about this, not even afterwards. So the idea that this is reversing the Health and Social Care Act hides the fact that it's getting rid of, the bit that regulated.
So what you're saying there is really interesting, Nick, as well, because that makes me think that the reason that the High Court has found that Matt Hancock broke the law in terms of how he awarded the contracts is really only because they hadn't got round to actually changing the law to what they're planning to change it to yet.
That's right.
So in a year's time, if he'd been doing it under his new regulations, he'd probably be fine, because they're changing the law to make it legal for them to be giving contracts without proper competitive processes, without proper pricing, discussions and all the rest of it, to people, even as we've seen, that don't even know how to do the job that they're being paid for. And yet, fortunately, they hadn't had the chance to change the law by that point, and the court has ruled against them. But, I think that the huge thing with this, we're not just talking about the fact that he's been giving out cash to his cronies. The fact is, this has been what they've been good at during the whole bloody crisis, while we've lost at least 130,000 people, and we might have lost as many as, again, on top from the stats that have come out this week about the number of people who leave hospital after being admitted for coronavirus, who then die within a year because of it as well, and wouldn't get counted in the stats. And, so we have this mass, even the British Medical Journal called it social murder going on. And the leader of the opposition, kind of says, "Oh, we don't want to be too hard on Matt Hancock. I won't be calling for his resignation." I don't think he's done the right thing, but, let's let bygones be bygones. It's just absolutely insane. But it's not just Starmer himself. His front bench has been doing the same thing, Dan, when you were telling me about this before.
Yeah, Jonathan Ashworth. I thought I'd have a quick look through to see what the Shadow Health Secretary, Matt Hancock's shadow, of course, might have been saying about this today. And as much as I can find of what Jonathan Ashworth has put out on Twitter today, he's put out a tweet saying 224,000 people wait over a year for treatment, and this time last year it was 1,600. Matt Hancock promises to get this waiting list down to zero, saying that this priority for the second half of 2021, he needs to outline how he will deliver and how other urgent care will be assessed. And, you think, hang on a moment, he's been found guilty of breaking the law here, and you've got nothing to say on that? Nico makes this interesting case that this change in law that may be coming through. Are our Labour front benchers, our Labour leadership team, are they in support of this? Because, hang on a minute, let's just have a look exactly and see what's been going on here. Because there's one really classic example of the cronyism that's been going on, which, if what Nico is saying is right, then this is what's coming in that will be made legal within about a year's time. The Jockey Club is what I was going to come around to. It's based in Newmarket, which is in Matt Hancock's constituency. And of course, we all know of Dido Harding by now, and she sits on that board. And Hancock handed her this track and trace contracts. Any hint of wrongdoing was overlooked because the Tory party's anti-corruption champion happens to be married to Dido Harding. And the track and trace has been a very high-profile failure on the part of the government. And she isn't the only person from the Jockey Club to get handed health contracts either. It is very much jobs for Matt's mates. It reminds me of what used to go on during the Cameron years, where if you were a mate of George Osborne, you'd get a cushy job, or you'd get taken on. And the Tories have acted with impunity regarding regulation for years, as we can see. We've known for years they consider themselves above the law. It just comes as a shock to see the leader of the opposition and his front bench team actually seem to think so as well.
Well, I was having this conversation with my wife earlier on, and she asked me, said, what what are they really doing? And what would it have been like if Jeremy Corbyn was the leader? I'm not one for going off into realms of kind of, what ifs. But, just imagine even if he was just in opposition and running government, the Tories wouldn't have got away with half of what they feel they're getting away with at the minute, because somebody would be drawing attention to it and banging on. And all the party activists would be feeling energised and excited enough to say something about it and try and stop them from doing what they're doing. Yeah. In the end, what we've got is a disenchanted movement. We've got tons of people who are totally uninspired by the leadership at the moment, not saying anything, because and they take people do take their lead from the top in that sense. And if the party's not saying anything about it, then there'll be much less noise made about it by the rest of the movement. And it is, and some people will, because they always do, say that we're overstating the case, that 130,000 people have died and 130,000 of those were unnecessary. But you look at New Zealand. That's what we keep going back to. Take whatever the UK death total is today, take off 25, and that's the total number of needless deaths, because that's all that New Zealand lost, because they actually properly reacted to the crisis and got ahead of it instead of waiting for it to all happen and then pretend, that what they were doing to mock, playing catch up was adequate.
Yeah, it is such an easy, obvious thing to oppose a breach of the law. And as an opposition party, if you want to be an opposition leader, and the government are making an absolute pig's ear of what they're doing with regards to the COVID situation or regards to the economy, what you do as a leader of the opposition, and you can guarantee Corbyn would have been doing this, is presenting an alternative option and championing that. And you only got to look at New Zealand, for example, to see exactly how they managed. It's an island nation, just like our own. See what they did. See what worked there, because clearly it did work very, very well there, and implement it here. It is really that simple. There is absolutely no reason it couldn't be done. But different priorities for different governments.
Yeah.
And that's where we are.
Totally. I mean, in the last few days, we've seen LBC radio host James O'Brien completely lambast and attack a caller for daring to suggest that he preferred Jeremy Corbyn over Keir Starmer. It was completely unprovoked attack, and the caller had no opportunity to defend himself. But I just want to make it clear, this isn't a matter of us lefties complaining about the action or inaction of the current leader of the opposition. Even Alistair Campbell, who was Tony Blair's, advisor and, arch Blairite, is actually complaining about what's gone on here, and he's calling it out. So it's not just dissatisfaction from the left ranks. There seems to be a lot of dissatisfaction from all parts of our broad church. So I just wanted to make it clear that it's not just us complaining and whinging about Starmer, but there are legitimate concerns and legitimate complaints that need to be called out.
Well, what Campbell went after in specific was the fact that nobody on the media, I think the first mention I've heard of this on the media was when Sophie Ridge asked Keir Starmer about it during the programme. And, there hasn't been headlines. You can imagine if it had been a Labour Prime Minister, particularly if it had been Jeremy Corbyn and anything like this, was judged in a court, it would be non-stop news for weeks. And yet there's been almost entire silence and a news blackout on the fact that the Secretary of State for Health in this country has been found to be breaking the law. And he's absolutely right. And, that's very rare. I'll agree with Alistair Campbell over anything, but, the silence about this has been an absolute scandal and shows yet again how broken the media estate is in this country in terms of actually informing people and giving, enabling the democracy to function by people being informed. But it's not, Keir Starmer, I think, it's a very obvious disgrace that he's, inflicted on the party again today with that response. But, he's done worse than that in some areas. I mean, he's wanted to let Matt Hancock off the hook here, but in some cases he's been driving the Tories further into doing the wrong thing. With the schools one is very obvious, but now we've got a situation where the right-wing, multi-millionaire Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has announced or leaked out to the media through his office that he's wanting to increase, put 4%, 4 points on the level of corporation tax. And Keir Starmer is to the right of the Tory Chancellor and doesn't want to increase corporation taxes on the broken old argument that doing so is going to hamper growth rather than actually kind of, put companies into a position of actually making a proper contribution to the society. why have we got a Labour leader, people, that is positioning himself to the right, and who's he trying to please? Who's he actually appealing to with this?
Well, it's not socialists, is it? Let's be honest, the Tories are now peddling to the socialist tune. It's just straight out of the Corbyn McDonnell playbook, the manifesto book, isn't it? Really, increase, taxes on the wealth, on the big corporations. It's a no-brainer. It raises money, but what Sunak's proposing isn't even that radical. It's, even as he raises it, that 4 points, we've still got the lowest tax rate going in the whole of Europe, I believe. I think it's coming up to something like 23%. It's still well below. It still makes us an attractive country to be in, and it will bring in revenue. It is a no-brainer, obvious solution. Let's tax the rich a little bit more. Of course, why not? Why has nobody else thought of this? But for the Labour leader to be opposed to it, I mean, is he that desperate for donors right this second in time that he's afraid to do anything against any wealthy person or any wealthy corporation going? I mean, I can't think of another reason why he'd take this route, to place Labour to the right of the Conservatives on taxing the rich. It is absolutely absurd.
And politically, it's insane because he's allowing the Tories to eat his lunch, basically. So what's he going to come back at them with when it comes into general election campaigning time?
Keir's not been an MP for very long, and I just wonder how many doors he knocked on in the pre-Miliband era, when we were told time and again on doorstep after doorstep, constituency after constituency, that there was no point voting Labour because they were no different to the Conservative Party. And I really don't want to go back there. It makes canvassing really hard work and really demoralising. So unless he's wanting to consign us to the dustbin of political history, I can't see what he's getting at.
I mean, I'm sorry to those watching that we haven't met this, the Starmer show, essentially, because I'd much rather be bashing the Tories. But the fact of the matter is he's forcing us to have to talk about what he's doing or failing to do at the minute. The other thing that we've seen this week was the absolutely dire, it wouldn't be quite as bad if they hadn't made such a performance of bigging up what this speech was going to be groundbreaking and was going to change the game and all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, he gives a speech, and the only thing he can come up with is a policy that they're already trying to bury, because this idea of recovery bonds has been derided by virtually everybody, and they're so embarrassed about it now that they've stopped talking about it almost instantly. And yet the Blairites are lining up, Blairites and the Starmerites, for whatever kind of fag paper you can get between them, are lining up now, obviously briefing out to the media to try to make Shadow Chancellor Annalise Dodds the fall guy. Now, I'm no fan of her performances, but, it was Keir Starmer who got up there and made that absolutely awful speech. And they're trying to shift the blame onto somebody else. It's a Boris Johnson tactic, essentially. If something goes wrong, blame the servants, sack a few of them, and
blame the women.
And carry on as if it never happened. Blame the women. Yeah, exactly. Annalise Dodds and, the blame shifting and not taking responsibility. Talk about that for a minute.
Now, Dodds is, she's not been the most inspirational of chancellors, shall we say, but she hasn't been the most offensive either. She absolutely is being made the fall guy for that patently terrible speech that he made the other day. And he has to answer for it. It's all on Starmer. He has mooted a couple of policy moves, but didn't flesh anything out. And he even went so far as laughing at himself the moment he decided to bring up being able to work with trade unions. He literally giggled in the middle of it. It was the most excitement he expressed for the entire speech. I thought I almost woke out of my slumber slightly, but it is bad, actually. I mean, it's depressing, actually. I mean, we're a socialist Telly. We want to be taking the fight to the Tories, and here we are. So far, we've been hammering Starmer because he's been so terrible, and we've actually praised the Tory Chancellor. It's such an awful position to be in. We don't want to be doing this. We want to be.
Nick's waving like he wants to get in there. Just jump in, Nick. Don't worry.
Jump in, yeah. The thing about tax, I mean, it was pushed a lot by UK Uncut before Corbyn became leader. They were trying to link the fact that the government was saying it had no money to provide services with tax, big companies not being taxed, and they did that put the message out quite effectively. I think it was quite influential in the statement that Corbyn's leadership started off with that austerity is a political choice. Now, really, the question would have been, why is it a political choice? What is it trying to achieve? What is all this talk of having to tighten our belts about? And if you listen to Cameron, he clearly said in a speech in 2011, it was about permanent changes. It wasn't just about the deficit. It was about, making a leaner country. You're talking about the services. And the changes that they've been making to the services actually built on changes that were made when funding was very high for those services under New Labour, which, New Labour became very unpopular, in particular because of its hospital closure programs and so on that Cameron made a big thing out of. So those things are carrying on all the way through, whether people are taxed or not taxed, whether, they call it austerity or not, where COVID is framing everything or not. That's the policy agenda, and it's carrying on to, the academisation in education, for example, and accountable care instead of the NHS has been a policy constant. It's not changed. So I think the important thing for the left is to focus on what's the core thing we're trying to defend, because the right will always take the left's language and regurgitate it and use it for the opposite agenda. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether they tax people or not, they are reducing the size of the services. They're reducing the purpose. So that's
it's like when they tried to outflank Labour on the living wage by changing the minimum wage to call it the living wage, but hadn't really changed anything about it. It was just branding. So you never trust a Tory. I mean, that's the underlying thing that stands out. Whenever you look at the political situation, they're always up to, if they're breathing, they're up to something. But allowing them to outflank you as easily as that, and actually then positioning yourself, not even realizing that and trying to correct it, but positioning yourself even further to the right of them and objecting to tax. But it's not the first time. It's not. I mean, I had a complaint put into Impress about me saying that Starmer had opposed wealth taxes. And Impress, bless them, genuinely independent, not necessarily always on the same page as the rest of us, but they ruled that was correct. It hadn't been demonstrated enough that he was opposed to wealth taxes. Well, there goes Keir Starmer yet again opposing taxes on those with huge amounts of money. So it's not exactly out of character for him. It's certainly not a blip. It's a trend and a pattern. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Again, still the Starmer show. Labour Together, and people in Keir Starmer's Lotto, leader of the opposition office. It's really a bit of a misnomer, but that's what they call it. And two of his front benchers are involved or were involved in a company that is now under investigation by the Electoral Commission. Bonnie, have you been following up with this story?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I always like to, when I'm looking at dodgy finances in the Electoral Commission, I always like to think of those Tory buses that went round in elections gone past. It's hugely embarrassing that it's coming back towards our own party.
Yes, I mean, for those who haven't been, kept aware of the story, Keir Starmer's chief of staff was the former company secretary of Labour Together, Lisa Nandy on the front bench, and Steve Reid, another front bencher, Lisa Nandy, the shadow foreign secretary, are or were officers of the company, this Labour Together company, which has been allowed to set the agenda for Starmerism. It's not just that there's a link. They wrote a report about why they thought that Labour lost the election in 2019, that then became what has been known as the blueprint for Starmerism. And yet it's now come out that after they made a declaration on donations that they'd received, they made the declaration back in December, but some of those donations went back to the middle of 2018. And the electoral law says that you have to declare those donations within 30 days. So we're talking about 18 months in some cases. So that's now under investigation. There are, there's the involvement of another person with that company who's also been a major donor to Keir Starmer's leadership campaign. And I mean, it's a scandal, but the company's claiming that they are, it was an oversight and they'll never do it again, et cetera, et cetera. But let's just imagine for a minute that Keir Starmer's chief of staff and 2 of his front benchers had been involved in the company that did the same thing. And let's talk about what we would have seen then.
Well, if it was Jeremy Corbyn, I mean, that it would have been front page, wall-to-wall coverage, and no doubt Dimbleby's relative would have been camped out on his doorstep again, and Laura Koonsberg would have been doing on the hour updates on it. I think we're talking something in the region of 75% of the donations that were given were undeclared. This is a huge, huge scandal. And there was a big hoo-ha about who was funding Starmer's leadership campaign when he was seeking election. And he was very, very cagey about who his donors were going to be. And when we saw who a good few of them were, he had every reason to want to keep them quiet, quite frankly.
Just for clarity on one of those points there, Demo, it wasn't that they were undeclared, because some of them had been declared, but I think it was only about a quarter of the donations had been declared within the statutory period, and the rest were either somewhat late or very, very late.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, but it's the vast majority of them that are being scrutinised in this instance, and it does bring the party into disrepute. And when it's several members of the front bench that are also involved, and these are not individuals that were ever particular. They're quite often not regarded as left wingers, shall we say? They're very much Starmer's camp. It does make you wonder just how deep down the rabbit hole this goes. And
Bonnie, you were waving there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if there's going to be an investigation, I wonder if the report will come out before or after the Ford report.
We'll be in the next Ice Age.
Well,
we seem to be waiting a long time for a lot of these facts to come out. Meanwhile,
it's
so much reputational damage is being done to our party. We need some answers now. We need to be upfront. We need decent politics. People deserve decent, honest politicians. And without wanting to constantly hark back, Jeremy Corbyn obviously offered that, and the media hated it. But the media or the mainstream media seem to be completely happy with all this sort of smoke and mirrors and dodgy goings on that we're seeing and that we're finding about. These things will always come out in the end. The sooner they're exposed, the better for all of us.
Well, that's establishment politics for you. I mean, you can harken back to the James O'Brien mention that you made earlier on. They don't want change. We need change to, make our lives that much better, because the inequality in this country is absolutely crazy. But these people don't want it. Establishment media do not want it. James O'Brien shouted that poor guy down, Ian, who Socialist Telly is still looking to try and contact, by the way. Hint, hint, thunk, if anybody knows him. But it's just horrible, horrible, horrible way to treat somebody, and all because they said those words, socialist or hard left. These are terms that are being redefined by establishment media to mean they're not worth listening to. Their politics is loopy. You want to listen to us, we know what we're talking about, and we'll put on a nice suit and tie and look the part for you. So because we look the part, we're the ones you want to listen to, and not those people who have all these daft ideas about wealth redistribution and renationalization. They're don't
all those popular policies.
Yeah.
Nico,
just listening and agreeing, basically. Yeah, I mean, it's about making the society fairer, and it's very simple, making it fair in a way that actually, as a society, we'd achieved. When I grew up in the 70s, it was the most equal period in the country's history. But what Britain did with the welfare state and other European countries have done have made it extraordinarily fair in so many ways. I'm not saying in every way, and that's what's been taken away. So it's a big crime being committed against all our society, and it's the very minimum that we have a political representation for the vast majority that nobody really ever voted for this. It was never actually proposed to us. The election will get rid of the welfare state. We'll replace it with, crony contracts and turn it all into businesses for people to make money out of while reducing your services. Nobody's proposed that, and they're doing it. So it's not a luxury to have political representation says this is wrong, this is not legitimate, and it has to be reversed. It's a minimum right that we have.
Did you miss the memo, Nico? Starmer told us we've got to stop looking backwards, but we've got to do better than there was in the past. Didn't you read that?
Well,
That was, that's worth a chat about that, because there was, that actually spawned a new game for everybody this week. A new lockdown entertainment for everyone was, take the first few words of Keir Starmer's speech into a text message and see what your auto suggest was on your phone was going to make of it. And to be honest, most of what I saw was better than what he actually came out with. He trailed that speech with, we're going to look forward to a society that will, be almost unrecognizable from the one before, or words to that effect. And the idea was that, let's do a recovery bond, and that was it. It wasn't, it wasn't that the media was unfair to him. He got to deliver that speech live on both of the news channels, as far as I saw. So it wasn't getting edited out, and yet there was nothing in it. And you wonder where, in which focus group does it, which focus group told him that it was a good idea to oversell and underdeliver? Because that's one of the basic, even from a point of basic political competence, the rule is under promise, over deliver if you're going to do it, if you're going to do anything. And, he went out bigging up this speech, letting everybody trail out how amazing it was going to be, and then doing this. Okay, so we'll move on to what I think will be the last bit of the programme. It's quite internal to Labour, so if you're not a Labour member or you're not interested, then it might be a good time to go make a coffee. But, we've seen the party, the National Executive Committee of the party, which is supposed to be the second highest authority in the party after the annual conference of members and union affiliates. We've already seen them change the rules once without bothering to take it to conference, in terms of how they themselves were being elected, or certainly the people who were supposed to represent the members in the party, to the National Executive Committee. They changed that from being, what it was, to being a single transferable vote system, which guaranteed right-wingers a certain number of seats on the NEC, even if we had all left members, basically. And now we're seeing them do it again, because we've seen an edict issued from the party, essentially saying that local CLPs, as they're called, the local parties, are not allowed to select their delegates to go to this year's conference, if it happens, until they have an annual general meeting, which could be months away and gives the right lots of time to organise for that. And we've seen the two elected member representatives on the Conference Arrangements Committee come out and make a statement saying, where's this come from? There's absolutely nothing in the rules that says that that's necessary. Is the party trying to stack the conference ahead of trying to rig all the rules that they haven't changed yet in their favour?
Does seem that way, doesn't it? Fair play to Seema and Billy on the Conference Arrangements Committee to put out their response to this onto social media for everyone to read, because they have gone, where has this come from? Under what authority are you imposing these changes? It's not right. And the only reason you can possibly be making changes to the Conference Arrangements Committee, whose job it is to arrange conference each year, is to try and stack the delegates. It does seem to me that, okay, there's been a lot of talk online, and justifiably so, about how unhappy an awful lot of CLPs are with the way the current administration is running things, particularly with regards to acting General Secretary. That's acting General Secretary David Evans. And there's a great fear that conference will not confirm him in his role. So if they can, influence who can be a delegate, and in any way, shape or form to try and help Starmer get his man officially endorsed, then that seems to be the driving reason behind this.
Yes, and I think there's two big things. I think that's one of them, and we've already seen the party, formally tell members who they were in the process of reinstating from unjust suspensions that obeying David Evans, trumps solidarity as a principle of the movement now. But the other big thing, I think, and I'm not sure this is on people's radar enough, is the fact that if the right wing of the party want to get back to a position where we'll never get another left wing leader, the main thing that they need to change is going back to an electoral college system of voting on who's going to be the leader. Because when that was changed by Ed Miliband, that was what unlocked the possibility for a left-winger to get onto the ballot, and then for the members on a one-member, one-vote system to be able to elect him and do it twice. Under the Electoral College system, however many MPs we have in Parliament gets the same number of, the same weight in the voting as the entire membership of the party. So it gets divided, a third for the MPs, a third for the unions, and a third for the plural members, however many hundreds of thousands of them we might be. And I think, that's the game changer, really. That's game over if they manage to get that change, because it will be virtually impossible to get another left winger ever elected to the leadership. So I want to make I'm sorry I'm talking. I like to let other people talk generally, but I want to make an appeal to people. If you're not in the party, if you left the party and discussed what's going on, but you think there's ever any future for Labour, or if you're still in, if you're not in, join, because you need to have been in for 8 weeks before you're allowed to vote in something like selecting delegates to send to conference. And if you are in, hang in there long enough to get some left delegates sent to the conference, because this is the deal breaker, really. If we ever want to see a Labour Party that can do any good and bring some real change, we need those left delegates at the conference, and we need left leadership in unions and on the executive of unions to tell their delegates when they got to conference which way to vote on this stuff, if and when it comes up, and it will. Sorry, Bonnie, go on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I'm secretary of the local constituency Labour Party. And as far as I'm concerned, we elected delegates for conference last year. Conference, obviously, last year didn't happen in any meaningful sense because of the virus. And it was my understanding that those delegates stand until they're able to attend a conference where, conference is supposed to be sovereign, the deciding body. And I also rather wonder if this lack of policy ideas in Starmer's speech come from the fact that they are simply not interested in what membership want to say. It would seem this stamping down on democracy within our party is causing a dearth of policy ideas at the very top of the party, which is not very progressive and not very helpful. But obviously, all of these issues are why so many constituency parties are passing the trade union and various left organised groups motion for a recall of conference, so that we can actually have delegates go forward and vote on whether or not they're happy with the direction that the party's taken, and the unelected, unofficially appointed General Secretary, David Evans. So it's really important, if you're a member and your CLP is meeting, so it'd be really important, if you can, to take a look at the recall conference motion and see if you can get it passed by your CLP too, because we do have channels and we are supposed to be a democratic party, and we need to make sure that our voices are heard very clearly.
Vic? Yeah. You were talking about, Steve, earlier on, deciding who gets to be in charge being a factor, and it's also deciding what the party does in government, and that was really a huge and amazing thing about Corbyn's leadership. Was that opportunity for some kind of democracy in this country, in anybody really being able to join the Labour Party and get involved with collectively deciding what a government would do. That was an amazing opportunity, especially if you consider that a lot of times who is behind legislation in neoliberal governments. And so that, Blair has said, members, you can't trust members with, they're not responsible enough to decide policy. I've mentioned this before, like Kissinger said about Chile, that the people you can allow them to decide who was going to run the country. And, we've had conference motions that have challenged the policy direction, because they were asking for basically what we all collectively want to happen. For example, bring our services back. I always come back to that one. But there's been resistance in the shadow teams over the years to these motions passed, and ways found to act like you're supporting them, but not really supporting them, because something else guides those policies. It wasn't a desire to reflect the popular will inside the party, which is reflective of at least a section of society in there. And so, yeah, we have to consider why it's so dangerous for you and I and anyone to be able to have a say in what kind of country we want, and why it's so important to keep us shut out of that. Blair couldn't have done the things he did if he hadn't crushed and done things to contain democracy, turns conference into a big presentation, but without any real say.
Yes, I agree. And I mean, the excuse that the right wingers always give for justifying the behaviour of Tony Blair was that, he won some elections. But, at the moment, the media is giving Keir Starmer a free ride to do all this kind of stuff. He's getting very little criticism. And yet we're seeing that he's actually less popular than the newly declared lawbreaker, Matt Hancock, in terms of what people think of him. Behind him and Dominic Raab. And I mean, that's you've got to dig a deep hole to get under those guys. Thank you very much, everybody. I think that's been an interesting discussion. I'll put out a final appeal as we end the programme. Keir, I hear that you may sometimes watch this show. That's very interesting. Please, for God's sake, give us something to talk about that isn't having to criticise your performance, and I will be more than happy to mention it. But if you can't give us stuff to attack the Tories with, step aside and let somebody else do the job. The right want you out as well, by the sounds of it. The left certainly do, and I'm not in any position of confidence thinking that you actually are capable of doing better than what you're doing at the minute. If we leave it much longer, it's going to be too late to have any chance in 2024. Do the right thing, give us all a break, give the country a break, and let's have somebody in there who's going to call out lawbreakers who are responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. Take care.